Welcome to the François Picard debate, the migrant question. Another tragedy at sea. The exact death toll sadly may never be known after a boat full of migrants sank off Tunisia. It was bound for Italy. Most of the people on board were believed to have been Tunisian. This marks a change in the type of migrants seeking illegal passage to Europe. So far, it's estimated almost 50 lost their lives. Many are still missing, sadly. The doomed boat was bound for Italy. There, Matteo Salvini of the League, the far-right organisation, is pressing for an even tighter policy towards illegal migrants. Italy reduced its intake of migrants by 87% in 2017 after working with Libya to train its coast guard, basically stopping the boats before they actually set off. And in Paris this Monday, there was mass enforced evacuations of 2 migrant camps. Most of the 1,000 or so migrants were bussed away. They're from mostly Afghanistan, and some want to stay in France, others want to go elsewhere, places like the UK. Many, though, will eventually face deportation back to the EU state where they first entered the bloc. This forced evacuation pitted the more liberal city of Paris against the new stricter asylum policies of Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, the meetings continue. Europe's response this week will be in Luxembourg, a European Commission session examining the migrant question. A question without a clear and workable answer for over 3 years now. The UN says over 660 migrants have been killed crossing the Mediterranean, or trying to, so far this year. And this is a figure that most observers say comes nowhere near the actual truth of the matter. So, the migrant question. Here to discuss this and maybe find some solutions. By Skype from Buriana in Spain, Ricardo Gatti, Head of Mission at Open Arms. Thank you for being with us, sir. By satellite from Frankfurt in Germany, Achim Winter, author and contributor, Einblick magazine. Thank you too. By satellite from London, Nina Schirk, Director of Data and Polling at Rasmussen Global. Before we bring in all our guests, let's hear first from Italy's far-right leader, Matteo Salvini, on how he wants to deal with the migrant crisis.
We must open deportation centers in each region, making stronger agreements with countries of origin, and above all, renegotiate Italy's role in Europe.
Indeed, hearing this, knowing that there are people still waiting to be fished out of the Mediterranean who tried to cross the sea, makes it all the more moving and obviously brings home the immediacy of this massive problem that we're facing here across Europe, across North Africa, across the Middle East, the migrant crisis. Thanks to our guests for being with us. And let's kick off with reactions first. Skype from Buriana in Spain, Ricardo Gatti from Open Arms. Now, Open Arms, Ricardo, I understand you're joining us from the actual rescue boat that you have in the Mediterranean. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. Now, actually, I'm on board. I'm on the bridge of the rescue boat. Now we are waiting to finish our maintenance job to come back as soon as possible on the rescue operation.
And when you heard about what happened this weekend, I can't imagine you were surprised, given the frequency of these things, but clearly it must be very saddening for you and all the people working with you.
Yeah, for us, you know, we are working on this operation the last years in really near to and close with the Italian Coast Guard. So when we face like today with all the problem that the migrants face off in their trips, so people dying at sea, and we understand that the politics in this rescue and the treatment that from Italy, for example, doesn't want to help them in a proper way. For us, it's quite hard to understand why the behavior and the intention of the politics is not in the way to save and have and take care of these people. And after that, okay, to take care about the integrity and all the entire problem, if we can call it as a problem, because I cannot see it as a problem.
Ricardo, thank you very much indeed. The situation as expressed by Matteo Salvini, Matteo Salvini representing the League, of course, elected into a kind of king-making role within Italian politics because of its strong stance on the migrant issue. Let's bring in from Frankfurt, Germany, Achim Winter from Einblick magazine. And Achim, I understand that you're against open and uncontrolled borders and supporting very much the implementation of the Dublin Treaty. That's where people are fingerprinted in one country, they get sent back there the minute they are found to be elsewhere. So, for instance, the people in Paris who've been kicked out of their tents today, many of them could be sent back to wherever they first entered the EU. In terms of what Matteo Salvini is saying, do you feel that he's on the right track? Is it all about being really tight with the borders? Is that what it's about? Or are there other things in play that should be explored first?
Yes, it's basically impossible to discuss these matters now that we've seen the actual situation in southern Italy, because all you can do when people like this arrive and when people get killed, all you can do, of course, you go humanitarian and you say we have to go there, we have to rescue them, and we have to help them as good as we can. So when you turn up in a discussion like this, after this introduction, there's basically nothing you can do. When I say, okay, this is a big problem, one of the reasons why so many people cross the Mediterranean, because there's a pull effect. I have, as we say in Germany, the Black Peter. I'm a sort of not very nice person. But to answer your question, I think it is absolutely essential to, if we want to enhance the acceptance of the populace for the asylum seekers, that you make sure that you actually help people that need help and that you exert some sort of control who's actually entering it, and especially the people who come from the Mediterranean. I know that it's very bad to say that right now in this very moment, but I know there's quite a number of people with enough money at hand and not a sort of situation where they come from a war, where they are really in danger, that try and get into Europe, especially into Germany, I must say, and that the matter of control has to be discussed. It's very difficult to do that, and I've experienced here now the difficulty why people can't discuss that because of the pictures we've just seen. But still, of course, I think that the Dublin regulations have a deeper sense and that they should be followed through, yes.
I'm not trying to paint you as the Black Peter, as you called it, Achim, or the bad guy. That's not what this is about. But what I'm interested in...
No, I'm not meaning it, actually.
What I'm interested in finding out from you is whether you have any solutions on this. And is it about being stricter? Is it about stopping people coming in?
Yes.
Basically, it is.
It's not stopping them from coming in, but in Germany now we have a scandal here at the moment where it's good to have people come and say, I need asylum. Of course, that's a wonderful human right and we need it. But we are at the moment at the brink of destroying it, because now we have this scandal here in Germany where we found that everybody who came here claiming asylum were actually not checked afterwards if they had the right to claim asylum. And so in the population, I think there's quite a growing number of people who think that everybody who wants to join this country, who wants to come here, can do so. And I'm quite sure that in the long run, this will destroy the solidarity of people against the asylum seekers, for the asylum seekers. And I think especially in Italy, that has been very much strained by this problem, the solidarity has diminished significantly.
Indeed. Italy.
So I think, of course, as I said, you need,
Italy, as you say,
you need a sort of control.
Italy, as you say, I can very much bearing the brunt of the migrant crisis. The type of numbers that people in France, certain people in France, are complaining about is nothing compared to the numbers that Italy as a country has had to absorb. And I think something like 4 billion euros a year going on trying to resolve the migrant crisis as it unfolds within Italy's borders, making people on the far right, and obviously as the anti-establishment five-star movement proved as well, people on the other side of the political spectrum actually sort of see this is a big problem and maybe subscribing to what you're saying to try to resolve things. Let's bring in Nina Schick, who's Director of Data and Polling at Rasmussen Global. Nina, thanks for being with us, joining us by satellite from London. There you are, looking at London in the background. I'm getting homesick. Good to see you. Thank you very much. In terms of what we're hearing Obviously, we've heard from Riccardo Gatti, who's working at the sharp end of trying to fish people out of the sea. And that is a noble thing he's doing. We're hearing from Achim about his views on how this crisis can't be allowed to stop countries from letting people come in who need asylum, but it shouldn't just be an open door. That's what he's saying. In terms of...
Well, I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree with both your commentators. I mean, what Riccardo is doing is very honorable from a humanitarian crisis. Nonetheless, what Achim pointed out is also true. Because if you have a situation like you did in 2015 at the height of the migration crisis, where Europe is inundated with asylum seekers, some of them valid asylum seekers escaping war and persecution, but also economic refugees, and there is simply no ability in the system to register these people, check who they are, kind of validate their claims, then what's going to happen, and what we see happening already, is that public opinion and politics is going to react to that. And if you look at Italy, for example, the rise of Lega and Five Star is very much rooted in the migration crisis. And when you played the clip by Salvini just now, I mean, what did he say? He said, we are going to use this to renegotiate with the EU. So from the perspective of a political commentator and analyst, I have to say that the migration crisis has shaken Europe to its very core. And indeed, it could be the issue that even leads to the breakup of the EU. I know that sounds very almost sensationalist, but if you look at the divides in North and South, East and West, it's unsurprising given that the EU as an institution didn't really have the functions in place to be able to deal with the crisis as such. So if you look at the European neighborhood, it's increasingly in turmoil, the Middle East, North Africa, and for a long time it seemed as though the EU was, they were safe from that was not really their issue. But that really came to the fore in 2015, and because we have this Schengen area in the EU where there's no internal borders, that of course led to the question of, okay, what do you actually do with people if they've been rejected? How do you deport them? How do you actually know where asylum seekers or refugees are going to be? And it has seized on the public imagination in a way that's leading to a very toxic political debate. Of course, that's not to say that some of the claims being made by parties like Lega Nord when it comes to asylum seekers or refugees are true. Nonetheless, it's a very potent and dangerous political message. So if the EU and national governments cannot be seen as exercising control in this area, I think you go down a very, very slippery slope, which is ultimately not only bad for those who actually need humanitarian assistance, but I would say is also threatening to the EU as an institution and a purveyor of liberal democratic values around the world itself.
I hear what you're saying completely, and I hear people nodding all over the place listening to your words, Nina. In terms of the EU's reaction to the migrant crisis, I mean, clearly there was the deal struck with Turkey, which had very limited success. This is the problem. There's no real sort of big, sweeping, unified cooperation to get this right.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And if you look at the EU's frontier agency, Frontex, it's severely underfunded. So the fact that, you can't have, in the EU, you have the Schengen area where you basically dismantle interior borders, but you can't have that unless, of course, you have a strong exterior border as well. Of course, the EU is trying to do other things like the deal that they're trying to do with Libya or the deal that they did with Turkey. But in a more long-term perspective, I think these kind of moves of mass migration, it's definitely not something that we've seen the last of. And if you look at political events around the world and also things like climate change and so on, this is going to be something that's going to define the future. And because the EU's neighborhood is so unstable, the EU needs to come up with a more unified and coherent response. A lot of that will be trying to do assistance, economic development in actual countries where otherwise migrants or asylum seekers might come to Europe. Of course, that costs a lot of time. It takes money. And as ever, when it comes to who's going to pay into any kind of EU fund, when it comes to the EU member states, that's always a battle. And it's increasingly hard to win when you have many governments who are pretty anti-migration, almost, saying views that would have been considered xenophobic only a few years ago. So it's hard to see where the coherence or the strength comes into the EU response when the member states are so divided on this amongst themselves.
Indeed, the issue of Frontex, you mentioned that word. It's a dirty word to many governments, isn't it? They don't want to pay towards that, do they, Nina?
Well, yeah, but I mean, they don't want to pay to it, but at some extent, I mean, if you want to have Schengen, which has in many ways been a huge success, we saw the weaknesses, of course, during the migration crisis of 2015, then you need to have a strong external border. Now, if the EU's external border agency isn't well equipped, funded, or have the people, the equipment, anything that they need to do that, then it's not going to be able to stick up to its tasks. So either you have what you had during the migration crisis of 2015, where you see nations basically putting up fences, putting up temporary border controls again, which is, you know, something that's not good in terms of trade or for European citizens being able to travel freely around the EU area. Or alternatively, you have to move towards a common solution. Now, in 2015, of course, Angela Merkel was very much thwarted when she tried to do exactly that, when she tried to introduce a burden-sharing quota to distribute refugees around the EU. And she was, you know, struck back pretty heavily by all the Central and Eastern European states saying, we do not want to have any part of this. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation, because in order to resolve it, the EU countries would have to work together. But again, there's a lot of national politicking going on here.
Indeed, and when you get that kind of disunity, it just makes any kind of global policy seem incredibly far off. Nina Schicke-Rasmussen, thank you very much indeed. Let's show you some tweets that have come into us. You can have your say, of course, via the hashtag F24debate, via Twitter, of course. And this is the result of your work if you send one in to us. This from Georgia Caziolas, visitor to our shores, very frequent, at F24debate. They should not have got in the boat to begin with. Talking here about, of course, the Tunisian people who got into that people smuggling boat to set off from Tunisia to try to reach Italy. Time to tell people borders are closed, he says. Use legal channels if you want to migrate. Illegal migration will destroy Europe. That very much echoing the views, I think, of Achim Winter. And we will bring all our guests in for more comment in the second part of this debate. Do stay with us here on François Picard.
Le secret, c'est comment rafraîchir et devenir vierge.
They're all over YouTube and in the markets of West Africa. Products supposed to help women tighten their vaginas and keep their man. We went to Senegal to talk to women about the pressures of being a woman in a society where a man can have 2, 3, or even 4 wives. And their response.
The Observer's Direct, presented by Derek Thompson on France 24 and France24.com.